Hello, everyone. My name is Denise Harlow. I'm the CEO of the National Community Action Partnership, and I'm so excited that you are on today's webinar to get kind of those foundational elements about what is community action and why does it mean now more. It means as much now as it ever did in the past, and I would argue that it probably even matters more now and into the future. So thank you for being on today's webinar. Thank you for your investment in community action. Thank you for giving parts of your life to community action. And we hope that today's webinar will help provide you a good foundation and will hopefully provide maybe some answers to some questions. We do have some Q&A. We have a Q&A window and a chat window on the right side of your screen. You are able to put in questions that we will pause periodically to check in with to see if there's anything that we can answer. Everyone is on mute today, so we're not able to unmute you. But please put your question in the Q&A box, and you can always email me. I may not be the person who gets directly back to you, but I'm happy to forward your question to someone or respond if that's something that I am able to do. So please feel free to reach out if you have questions during today's webinar. So we want to agency kind of binds us together is the Community Action Promise. And the Community Action Promise reads, community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. This promise might be something that you recite at your staff meetings, your board meetings, community events. We certainly start off our board meetings with the promise. We start off all of our big conferences and events with the promise of community action. It really grounds us in who we are, what we believe, and it embodies who we are as a network. And as a network, we're quite a wide, diverse organization. We have 1,000+ organizations coast to coast. We have them in red, blue, purple states. 99% of America's counties are served by a community action agency. And you'll see here, this is a slide that kind of articulates, I'm sorry, the slides are jumping around. I'm going to try to get them back. There we are. Hopefully, Charity, you can see the one with the huggy heart that has all the pictures behind it. That's titled Community Action Agencies. That's where I'm sitting. Community action agencies, we're really trying to think about how we frame and how we talk and how we use the best language in framing research about community action. So you can see here that there are really three core things that we see community action agencies doing. That you connect individuals and families to approaches that help them succeed. We define success unique to every family. Every family's challenges are different and unique. And the bundle of services and strategies to help them move forward is going to be unique to each individual person and family. As well as defining success will look different for every family as well. Community action agencies also promote community-wide solutions to seemingly stubborn challenges. We do family-level work with families and individuals. And obviously the word community is in our name, community action. So we are also engaged historically in community-level change. And as a network, as we look into the future, we see community action being more engaged in community-level efforts, going upstream to try to solve community-wide issues, policy, change in systems, changing in how programs and services work together. And third, community action agencies certainly do share their expertise with national, state, and local leaders who are looking for evidence of what works. You'll hear a lot in the field about evidence-based strategies, evidence-informed practices, things like that. We believe community action is chock full of evidence. We may not always have the double-blind, independently controlled studies through universities. We do have some of those, however, certainly, but we do know that our programs and services are grounded in evidence, and we know our organizations make a difference every day. Now, today, community action, poverty continually changes, right? It's not a static, it's this, not that. There's a lot of stereotypes about poverty in our community. There's a lot of stereotypes about people who live with low income in our community. And we in community action have an obligation to speak truth to power, to speak the true narrative when it comes to poverty. And poverty today, we are seeing growing income disparities. You see this in the news, you see this in the research. The poor are staying poor, and the rich are getting richer. Income disparities as well as wealth disparities. When we look at how much assets families have in their household, we are seeing again that whether it's the stock market growth, people who can invest in retirement plans perhaps, people who own their homes through the recession and now afterwards, the growing wealth disparity is significant. And we also see that impacted by racial inequality and structural racism. We'll talk here in a moment about the partnership's value statements that are grounded in equity. And again, Community Action's history is grounded in the civil rights movement. We are seeing increasing educational disparities, health disparities. You'll see the slide up there that says poor men die a decade earlier. And I can send you more information about this, but many of you probably have read that you can live 2 miles apart from each other. If someone is living above average income and someone is living below the poverty line, their life expectancy can be significantly different. The chart you see there is actually from a gentleman, Raj Chetty. He's an amazing researcher, an amazing advocate. If you want to Google him, he has a ton of information that's easy to use, easy to access about income and wealth disparities. We know that housing continues to grow from an affordability standpoint. We know that America is aging, and that's going to pose challenges with retiring baby boomers and even the generation ahead of them as they get older and more frail. What services are there, and is there a role for community action to play there? And we also know the opioid epidemic certainly is a hot button topic at the moment, but we also know that substance abuse issues is something that community action has been engaged with for decades, and the impact of substance abuse on families and is significant, whether it's for a child's progress and growth as they become adults, whether what happens with the family structure, and let alone the challenges to the individual who may be dealing with substance abuse issues. But community action is engaged in all of these pieces. But these things shift. So you as community action professionals, we want you to stay abreast as much as possible on the trends in poverty in your community. And we'll talk how community action agencies every 3 years have to do a community-wide needs assessment to demonstrate and to document community-level needs. I'm going to talk here a little about Sargent Shriver. Sargent Shriver is the grandfather of community action. He was the first director of the Office of Economic Opportunity, which we'll talk about here in a moment. You can see here, I love this quote from Sargent Shriver. What can change the world today is the same thing that has changed it in the past, an idea and the service of dedicated, committed individuals to that idea. That is what we are. We are the embodiment of the war on poverty in the 1960s and that belief that every one of us can make a difference. And we're going to talk about a concept called maximum feasible participation, which means that people living with low incomes are involved in our organizations, right? 1/3 of our board members are democratically selected from low-income communities. Our Head Start policy councils engage parents in true decisions about the academic structure, what's going on in the Head Start program. We believe that everyone has a role to play. So we're going to touch base here a little bit on the points in time across the decades. There have been activity. We started, certainly our roots are in the 1960s and the war on poverty. We'll talk here a bit in a moment about the Great Society and President Johnson, but we'll also take you through the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the aughts, where we are now, the teens, I guess, and what's coming up next, the 2020s. Community action is not stuck in the past. We are grounded in our past. We have a respect for our history, but we are a nimble network that takes that history and uses today's technology, that uses today's thinking, that uses today's research to impact poverty across America. I will be referencing a number of national partners, and you may hear about these national partners in your CAP agency yourself. So the partnership, that's who we are, the Community Action Partnership. We are a training and technical assistance and advocacy organization. We are your national membership association. We have CAP Law, it's great to have a group of attorneys. They're located up in Boston. CAP Law has, I think, 4 full-time attorneys on staff, or 3.5 or so, who can provide legal assistance to CAP agencies during the course of the year. They also have a conference, as do we, and you'll hear more about those as we go forward. Now, NCAF is the National Community Action Foundation. It's not a foundation in the way that foundations give you money. NCAF was created in the day when some foundations or other types of nonprofit organizations. And NCAF is our advocate and lobbyist on the Hill. David Bradley is the executive director of NCAF. We'll talk more about him in a moment. But he is our person on the Hill every day talking to policymakers about the value and impact of community action. And NASCAS. Now, that one's a tough one to get your mouth around, at least it is for me. The National Association for State Community Services Programs. NASCAS is also a national organization. Their members are your state CSBG Community Services Block Grant offices and your state weatherization offices. And we'll talk a bit more about CSBG here in a moment. But NASCAS works with all of the state folks across the country. They also have a conference, as does NCAF, and we'll be talking more about those as well. So let me touch base a little bit here about David, because I'll probably be referencing him as we go through here this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you're located around the country. David Bradley is the executive director. That's a picture of him on the screen. He, again, goes on the Hill every day and talks to legislators. He's doing hundreds of visits every year to advocate on behalf of community action and to push and lobby for the Community Services Block Grant reauthorization. We'll talk a bit more about reauthorization a little bit later, but think of David as he's the guy out there making sure that CSBG is funded, that appropriations is the technical term in terms of federal budgets, that money is appropriated by Congress for community action through CSBG, and he's fighting for CSBG reauthorization. In general, he's out there telling our story, telling folks how good agencies are, and the great work that you're doing every day. So is community action different than other nonprofit and governmental organizations? I would say yes. I've worked in nonprofits and government. I worked a little while in government, but I've primarily been in nonprofits for 28, 29 years. Community action agencies are different. Now, do we partner closely and do we do similar services and sometimes the same services as Salvation Army? Yeah, right? Many of our agencies are running congregate meal sites. We're doing emergency assistance. We're raising funds to distribute coats and mittens and hats and donations so we can help families stay warm here during the cold weather. But we're different. Are we like NeighborWorks that works with a lot of housing organizations? We have a lot of crossover. A lot of CAP agencies are also members of NeighborWorks. We do a lot of housing. We do a lot of homelessness prevention. We do a lot of emergency housing in community action, not across the board, but in many, many places. Are we like the Red Cross? We're not exactly like Red Cross, but we certainly do get engaged in disaster recovery. When tornadoes have ripped through Iowa or Missouri or Kansas or anywhere around the country, the Red Cross is on site, but so is community action. And oftentimes CAP agencies are that community hub where donations can come or some case management can happen. So we're not exactly like Red Cross, but we cross over. Catholic Charities, Lutheran Social Services, Jewish Family Services. Are we like them? In some ways. right? Are we doing family-centered services? Are we doing sometimes residential services? We do maybe a little bit out there. We are crossing paths in terms of home health care services, teen pregnancy prevention, group home programs. I know for parenting teens, there are a lot of places where there's crossover in terms of the types of services. And I know in many communities there are those multi-service nonprofit organizations. We're like them in a lot of ways too. But community action is unique. We are grounded. We are by statute mandated to fight and address poverty. Nobody else has this. The CSBG Act calls on us to leverage all community resources, to have what we were going to see later, a primarily catalytic mission, to take private dollars, government dollars, donations, volunteers, staff, and mush it all together. That's a technical term, mush, to address poverty. We are the national infrastructure to fight poverty in 99% of America's counties. In the reddest of Kansas, in the bluest of California, there's a CAP agency with low-income folks, elected officials, the private sector working together on the board. They're assessing community-level needs, and they're developing strategies to fight poverty in every corner of America, urban, rural, and suburban. It's pretty exciting to be part of such a national infrastructure network. Community action is a bit different as well. We have flexibility. A CAP agency probably looks a lot different today than it did in 1970, for instance. The bundle of services you provide may be different. There's probably some same services. Many agencies have run Head Start programs for 50 plus years. Many agencies have run weatherizations since they were started in the 1970s. But agencies are also doing economic development. We have an agency in New Jersey who is huge on solar installations, Cap Bergen. We're involved in immigration and helping families settle and access programs and services, and so their families can grow and thrive in communities. So we're flexible in every corner of America because every corner of America looks different, right? We are accountable. Our national network of nonprofit and governmental non-CAP agencies are highly accountable. We have to go through OMB. There's OMB stuff that we have to do when it comes to our accounting and our grant applications and our money management. We have organizational standards. There's so much there that we have to be accountable for. We also have our tripartite board, which I talked about by statute, 1/3 democratically selected from low-income communities. Now, that is very distinct language. We're not going to get really into the details in the weeds today, but that is distinct. 1/3 elected officials and the remainder 1/3 from the private sector. And I will say, actually, in the statute, it says at least 1/3 low income. So boards can actually have more than 1/3 of their board be from the low-income community. So addressing poverty historically, let's go way, way back. So before community action, the early stages of social work. As a social worker, I know many of you probably are social workers as well. You've learned about settlement houses. Those were some, and there are still settlement houses around in New York City specifically. There's a network of settlement houses that do receive CSBG, I believe, through New York City. They're there to help people settle, access training, language, housing, food and shelter, all those kind of wraparound services to help families thrive. Jane Addams and Hull House created and built the foundation of the field of social work. We started on early. The first steps of assisting Americans was around aid to widows and children. We had then certainly the Depression had an impact and ramped up the visibility of families who were struggling. And then World War II moved us into a new phase in our country and came out with the New Deal in terms of having Social Security, aid to dependent children, in terms of some of our historical elements. You'll also see here we note the GI Bill and the mortgage insurance program. The GI Bill certainly offered a number of Americans the chance when they came back from war to go to college. The mortgage insurance program certainly offered a number of people access to home mortgages. Unfortunately, our country, grounded in structural racism from the get-go in many ways in our country, those opportunities were not accessible to families of color in our history. Now, community action, again, equity is grounded in what we do. We highlight that these are opportunities in how our country has grown, but we also want to step back and recognize that not all services that our country had in place were available to everyone. So again, before community action was created, we had some of the initial granular pieces beginning to develop. If you want to do more research, the Ford Foundation funded what they called their gray areas project. I can never quite get my words around that. And community action has its history and its roots in those gray area projects funded by Ford, which is of course still a thriving foundation here today. If you really want to get into the history, I read this a couple years ago. It was Michael Harrington's book, The Other America. It really spurred conversation when it came to President Kennedy and President Johnson to do something. The Other America, and some might say we still have a bit of the Other America here in the U.S., was the depths of poverty in parts of our country was astounding to folks who had not seen it. I'm trying to put blinders up here across my head. So the Other America kind of awoke folks to understanding the depths of poverty in America. So in 1964, President Johnson, in his State of the Union, and many of you probably have heard this, this is the language that comes out of his State of the Union address. Let us carry forward the plans and programs of John F. Kennedy. JFK was going to invest in poverty, was going down that path before he was assassinated on a smaller scale than where Johnson ended up. But as you can see here, Johnson tying his horse basically to the JFK cart there. Not because of our sorrow or sympathy, but because they are right. This administration today, here and now, declares an unconditional war on poverty in America. Our joint federal-local effort must pursue poverty, pursue it wherever it exists. I encourage you to Google. You can find this speech on YouTube and listen to the audio and the video from President Johnson. Some CAP agencies have the speech up in their offices, posted up as posters. It's used in a lot of different ways, so this might be something you want to go back to and take a look at. So President Johnson did his State of the Union, right? That usually happens in January, declared the war on poverty. And in terms of how that kind of process has to happen, it had to come out as legislation. And that's what the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964 was, that piece of legislation that articulated the war on poverty. At the same time, you've seen the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. All of these pieces came out at the same time as Dr. Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement was moving and pushing our government to respond to poverty in America and to move our country toward equity. This is actually a picture of the signing of the Economic Opportunity Act and a picture of the actual document there on the left-hand side of your screen. In the Economic Opportunity Act, it talks here, I'll go to the middle of the paragraph. The United States can achieve its full economic and social potential as a nation only if every individual has the opportunity to contribute to the full extent of his or her capabilities and to participate in the workings of society. It is therefore the policy of the United States to eliminate the paradox of poverty in the midst of plenty in this nation. And that paradox of poverty amidst plenty is something for you to keep in the back of your mind. We talked a little bit about maximum feasible participation. Paradox of poverty in the midst of plenty. Michael Harrington's book, The Other America, showed the depths of poverty in America when other parts of America, cars, electricity, televisions, indoor plumbing. I just read an article today about lack of running water in America still to this day. So that paradox of deep, deep poverty in the richest country of the world was true in 1964, and I would argue it's still true today. And we in Community Action are on the front lines of eliminating that paradox. Also created as part of the Economic Opportunity Act, you'll have Job Corps, the VISTA program, Neighborhood Youth Corps, Head Start, community health centers. A lot of CAP agencies do run health centers, and I think we have 24, 25 CAPs who run federally qualified health centers. Some are youth programs, legal services, a whole number of programs were created at the same time. Now, I'll take you a little bit here as well. This kind of gets a little bit into the weeds, but some folks sometimes want to know why do our tripartite boards, how do they end up that way? In 1964, local cap agencies, 1,000 plus, were created in a matter of what, 2 years or something like that. I should know that number off the top of my head. I don't. My apologies. But many of your agencies have your birthday in your origination day in 1964, 1965, 1966, and 1967. I would probably say most cap agencies are somewhere in that window, unless you're even an older organization. But what happened then is that community groups came together to form these entities. And the funding went directly from the feds directly to these local groups. And as groups began to coalesce, began to be active, and began to be engaged, sometimes the powers that be get a little bit nervous about that. They wanted to make sure that elected officials and the government had a bit of control still. So you'll see here in 1967, the Green Amendment stipulated that local elected officials had the authority to designate the official cap agency for their area. Most were certified, the agencies that were developed, but a few big cities took control and replaced the existing cap agency made up of individuals with the governmental entity. And you'll still see that today when we talk about public caps and private caps. Private caps are 501c3 nonprofit organizations. Most of you are with nonprofits, but some of you are with public caps. Public caps are units of local government. And under the Green Amendment, for instance, in New York, there are 48 caps, I want to say, 46 nonprofit and 2 public, one of which is New York City. Big city, LA, is also a public cap. We have been seeing some public caps in big cities go nonprofit, like Detroit used to be a public cap. It is now a nonprofit. Boston, I believe, has always been a nonprofit cap. ABCD is the largest cap in the country. Big advocate, big organization, has always been a nonprofit. And then you'll also see the Quay Amendment that stipulated 1/3 of the board must be composed of elected officials, 1/3 would be from the private sector. And this, in essence, limited maximum feasible participation a bit. So rather than being the entirety of the organization, it became 1/3. Now, we build on that today. Again, we're one of the very few networks that have some mandated board structure. You'll sometimes see that whether it's with a mental health organization, you might see that with some housing organizations, you might see that with an HIV/AIDS organization and other groups, where there might be a percentage of board members must be customers or families who have family members or something like that. But you'll see here that 1/3 really helps us maintain our maximum feasible participation. I'm going to pause here for a moment, just take a quick look at the Q&A and chat window to see if there are any questions that came through. I don't see any, but I see that I did lose audio briefly in the beginning, but that it's back, so that's good news. So sorry about that. All right, so another step in our history is 1969. Nixon appoints Donald Rumsfeld as the director of the Office of Economic Opportunity, and those of us who've been around a while, that is the same Donald Rumsfeld. Rumsfeld, if you watch the movie Vice, you'll see a little bit of the Office of Economic Opportunity. Bits and pieces of that is in the movie because it is about Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, and others. So it's interesting to see a bit of our history in that movie. But he was somewhat supportive of the Office of Economic Opportunity and the work that it did and worked to improve its efficiencies. He did hire Dick Cheney and Christine Todd Whitman as part of the Office of Economic Opportunity. And this is one of the pieces that came out of that office, and it's one of my favorite quotes when it comes to some of our historical documents. That it says, the Act gives the Community Action Agency a primarily catalytic mission to make the entire community more responsive to the needs and issues of the poor by mobilizing all available resources. That just speaks to everything that we do from my perspective. We have a catalytic mission to keep moving forward and to bring everyone together to fight and end poverty in America. So last we said we were in the early 70s. I will say that the Nixon administration did try to shut down community action, and I have a picture here on the screen of Charlie Braithwaite. Charles Braithwaite is, again, one of those folks who was in on the ground floor. He was a mentor to many in the network. I was lucky enough to meet Charlie a few times before he passed away. Charlie and Bob Cord and others, when Nixon tried defunding the Office of Economic Opportunity, sued the president. Now, that took a lot of guts, and I understand his family may have been audited several times after said lawsuit. But it took a lot of guts for Charlie and others to step up and say, no, President Nixon, you cannot defund the Office of Economic Opportunity. Basically, it was going to happen very, very quickly. Memos were drafted and sent saying, get ready to shut down your organization. And the network even then came together and said, no, we're going to push back. Our country needs an infrastructure to fight poverty, and community action is it. And I will say that they were successful in that and won, and CAP agencies have been funded ever since. So you get to the 1973, 1974, and it's still at that point we were direct funded from the feds to the local. But what we lost under the Community Services Act of 1974, you began to see the funding, now known as CSBG, but then the Community Services Administration Act funding, kind of start to get buried within the bureaucracy. Back in the early days, it was a cabinet position. Folks actually sat at that cabinet table, actually had a voice to speak to power. And as things get buried in federal offices, that visibility has an impact, right? And you began to see that here in the mid-70s. Now, when President Reagan came on board, he wanted everything to go to the states. How did that impact community action? Well, initially, community action was pledged to be all defunded. Now, I know we've heard that in recent years as well, but the threat was to defund the Community Services Agency, to move everything into a block, into the Social Services Block Grant, and really to eliminate everything that came directly to community action. But given the work of David Bradley, NCAF, Bob Cord, and others, that did not happen. What happened was David and others created the Community Services Block Grant. All right, President Reagan, you want to block grant the funds so the monies go directly to states? We can make that work. We're going to survive. We will live to fight another day. Go ahead and block grant those dollars. They'll come through state offices. But what David and his team were successful with was making sure that local control was maintained. Other block grants, right? Child care block grant, TANF, all sorts of other kind of block grants. There's a lot of the state gets to decide where the flexibility sits. Now with CSBG, the local entities, the local boards, through your needs assessments, are supposed, I know that doesn't happen everywhere, but is supposed to have that flexibility. So if something changes, a plant shuts down, something new happens, you're able to pivot as an organization and fight poverty where you need and how you need. But states do administer the Community Services Block Grant. It goes through a different state department in every state. There's no one way it's done, just like there's no two same CAP agencies. Everywhere seems to do it a little bit differently. But by 1983, all states had assumed administrative capacity. And again, states tried to achieve a more equitable geographic distribution of funds. There's a lot of technical stuff buried in that CSBG Act about agencies who were in existence prior to 1981 continue to get funded, but governors and others could look at trying to use CSBG funds to expand accessibility and to cap uncapped counties. So you'll see another spread of agencies who were developed in the 80s, and you'll see occasionally CAP agencies developed in the 90s, the aughts, and the teens as CSBG funds leave one agency due to various problems and needs to be redesignated to another CAP agency. I will say that even in the block grant, that voter registration and political activities are still restricted. This isn't the right webinar probably to get into all of that, but just want to make sure that that is still seen. So the Community Services Block Grant was born. 90% of those monies, what is it, $710, $720 million at the moment. 90% of those monies go to local agencies via the state. States are able to keep 5% for administrative purposes, and most states take another 5% and it's discretionary, whether that goes to non-CAP agencies for services, whether that goes to the State Association for Training and TA, whether that goes out to CAP agencies through some sort of grant application process. It's discretionary, and it's up to the state how those dollars are dispersed. But they do stick with the the mission and purpose of community action. I'll touch here on reauthorization, and I'll pause again to take a look at the questions. So reauthorization is something that all federal policies have to go through. Last time CSBG was reauthorized was in 1998. So again, CSBG was created in 81, 82, reauthorized in 84, reauthorized in 86. That basically means Congress takes a look at it, makes any changes to modernize the act, and approves it again for another 5 years or whatever the term is. Unfortunately, 1998 was the last time we were officially, reauthorized, and David Bradley has been working so hard this year to get a number of sponsors onto the CSBG reauthorization bill, and we're very, very hopeful. He's got bipartisan support. I know it's an odd time to try to navigate Congress and such, but David has his eye on the ball, and we are working to get reauthorization through this year. So we'll talk a little bit about Roma. Roma has its foundation actually in the 90s, so we're moving right. So the 80s, now we're into the early 90s. We have the Monitoring and Assessment Task Force. Some of you may know that terminology if you're a Roma trainer. It was created by the Office of Community Services to respond to Vice President Gore to say, government, what works? Demonstrate that you're working. The government, GIPRA, the Government Responsibility and Performance Act, that doesn't quite spell it, but it's making sure that you can prove that you're working. And so we needed to create a way to talk about the work and success of community action. And so MATF produced the 6 national goals in the early stages of Roma. As you know, Roma still exists to this day, results-oriented management and accountability. It's all about how do we do good business and how do we tell our story. So here's a few other elements of some of our history in the 2000s up to 2011. The network went through a rebranding effort in 2000. We went from the pinwheel, and some agencies still use that pinwheel. I think I showed it on a previous slide on one of the as one of the little pictures. And we moved to what you see on the screen here, the Huggy Heart with the Community Action Partnership. And then it was deployed in 2001. Now, we also see here IM 49, Information Memoranda is what IM stands for, clarified some of the Roma and the need to tell your story and got that out the door. However, 9/11 in September of 2001 certainly impacted the country. And looking back, from my perspective, both the branding and the rollout of Roma was kind of really impacted by 9/11 in terms of where the country's focus really shifted. But you'll see here in 2004, there was a federal review that said CSBG, from their perspective, had no discernible outcomes. Now, we know that not to be the case, so you really kind of need to tighten up then some of the data collection, because what gets measured, can get reported up and can convince others that the work you're doing is right. None of us anymore can say, just trust us, we're doing good work. You got to demonstrate your outcomes. So community action can modernize with the best of them. So in 2004 or 2005, was the first attempt to create national performance indicators for community action. Again, early Roma, right? Those of you who are Roma trainers and Roma implementers, national performance indicators. Now, in 2007, we did have the Great Recession occur across our country. For some of us, it seems like yesterday. I know for many of you, it wasn't necessarily part of your professional life. Maybe it was right before you kind of came out into the professional world. Maybe you were still in school. But in 2007, the country's economic situation collapsed. Layoffs, people lost their homes. There was so much need. People who had never been poor in their lives were knocking on Community Action's door looking for food, shelter, clothing, assistance, help. We had a whole new group of people seeking our assistance. The country responded. President Obama signed the ARA, American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, at least I can still remember what those letters stand for, back in 2009. And that brought $1 billion extras in CSBG dollars and $5 billion in weatherization dollars into the network. Then our network had to take that money, develop programs, get the money back out the door, create jobs, and then come back down to the regular funding level in 2011, 2012 after all that great work. And I would argue that community action was very successful. in those efforts. Now, in 2011, some of you may, or this may be before your time as well, but President Obama, in his State of the Union, remember this was still at the time of the recession. That was a long period of time. He stood up in the well of Congress during the State of the Union and said, we all have to cut programs we deeply care about, like community action programs. Now, some folks thought he meant just generic nonprofit programs. No, he meant community action. It was a very sad day for me personally. I looked a little shell-shocked the next morning going into an advocates meeting. I received the sympathies of some folks around that table, but it was a very kind of sad evening. But it was a leverage point for the network. Because in President Obama's budget that year, following the State of the Union, he said, okay, we're going to cut CSBG in half and we're going to put the money out to bid. We're going to end the entitlement grants out to states and to local agencies. The network said, no, we're going to fight back yet again. We're going to demonstrate to you, Mr. President, that we are an accountable, highly functional, metric-driven, metric-focused, performing network. And so we created, as a network, CSBG organizational standards. We modernized and did Roma Next Generation, so we have a modernized performance management and measurement system. And we created state and federal accountability measures that are still in place today and active and engaged and almost fully rolled out at this point. Roma Next Gen runs a theory of change, a national one, we'll talk about here in a moment. It focused on increased data collection, a new annual report that we're really beginning to see some of the final phases really roll out, and really trying to deploy all elements of the Roma cycle. All right, I'm just going to see if there's any other questions. Someone is saying, please send additional poverty resources. Thanks in advance. We can send an email out to everyone with copies of the slides, and we'll put in some additional poverty resources as well. Charity, if you can make a note of that, that's a great suggestion. Thank you. In the field. This is the national theory of change. I know I'm throwing a lot at you in a very short period of time. There's just so many foundational elements to community action now that we're 55 years old. We celebrated our 55th anniversary in 2019. But this is our national theory of change. We're hoping that local agencies develop your own theories of change. There's no mandate you have to. But if you read the trades, if you are applying for grants, you hear a lot about theories of change. You know what? Community action, we have one. You'll see here the foundation is that we have a national network of 1,000 organizations, state agencies, national partners, a strong infrastructure. We believe certain things about poverty. We believe poverty is complex. Excuse me. We advocate for systematic change. We believe that every family has their strengths to build upon. The performance management side of the equation, we believe that our organization and our network operates really in a strong fashion. We have standards. We have accountability measures. What difference do we make? We have our NPIs, our indicators that can help tell the story. We deploy a myriad of services and strategies, whether that's employment, education, civic engagement, housing. Every agency looks a little bit different, but all of us are working to achieve those three national goals. Individuals and, oops, skipped a slide, sorry about that. Individuals and families with low incomes are stable and achieve economic security. Communities where people with low incomes live are healthy and offer economic opportunity. And people with low incomes are engaged and active in building opportunities in communities. So your agency may not use those three national goals as your strategic plan, for instance. Some agencies do, but most do not. Everything you're doing kind of funnels up into one of those three goal areas. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go too much into this. There's a lot of webinars up on our website around the 58 organizational standards for nonprofit caps and 50 standards for public caps. So we'll want to, if you want more information about that, there's a ton of information up on our website. But you can see here we have 3 big areas and 9 core areas, things like data and analysis, strategic planning, financial management. Our agencies are monitored against standards in these areas all across the country. It really gives us consistency across the nonprofits and the public caps. We talked a little bit about organizational standards, right? So we believe that they build a sense of trust and then they work together to demonstrate a healthy organization. I'm going to pause here, and again, I see a question has come in. Are we moving into 2020? How can the history of community action be innovative and self-sustaining in such a diverse network of helping agencies? That is a really good question. If we can really, for me, the history of community action, that we come out of the war on poverty, and that we come out of the civil rights movement, I think is grounded in exactly in what today is looking for and what today's environment needs. The increased focus on inequity, the increased focus on structural racism in our country. As we look to how immigrant families are being treated in our country, there's so much space here where the foundational elements of being in that civil rights frame to be grounded in the war on poverty, right? This is serious business. We have to have guts. We have to have courage. And we have to speak truth to power. And we have to, the term of art right now is change the narrative, right? We need to speak the true narrative about poverty in America. And if we're not going to be the ones to dispel the myths about poverty, who else is going to do it? So I'll try to keep that in the back of my mind, but that's a great question. Maybe that would make for a great newsletter article as well. Would welcome your ideas on how we might put something together around that. Thank you. Up here on the screen now is something that we put together in 2019 along with an advisory committee. We rarely do stuff here at the partnership that doesn't involve local agencies, associations, and states in some way, shape, or form. This had a committee to really help us tell the story and impact of community action. Is it perfect? No, but does it help us do better than we usually do in terms of how we can talk about our network? I think it really does. You'll see here we really do try to use the frame, the need, the reach, and the impact. This resource is up on our website. I encourage you to take a look at it if you have not seen it before. We have both the full document as well as the two-page document here. So what we're doing going forward, I'm not sure if these are in the right order, but I will tackle census now. So something coming forward is the census. Historically, community action has been involved in every census since its beginnings in the 60s. Every 10 years, right, the country goes through a decennial census. This year, we believe it's even more important for community action agencies to be involved. I encourage you to take a look at this website, communityactionpartnership.com/census2020. You can get tools, resources, toolkits, memes, all sorts of different things to help your agency be engaged. And why community action? Because we're worried about the hard-to-count communities. We're concerned that parts of America will not get counted. For every person that doesn't get counted, a community can lose up to $2,000 per person. I think in some places it's even more than that. But if you use that $2,000 number, if 1,000 people don't get counted, 1,000 children, 1,000 immigrants, 1,000 folks who are homeless, that community is going to lose $2,000 per person per year in LIHEAP, Head Start, in bridge money and infrastructure money. A whole bunch of federal dollars are dependent on that correct count. So again, if you look at the history of community action, we need to we need to make sure all of America gets counted. Hi, Charity. I see your text that things are stuck. Can you see me moving to where does community action go next? My apologies, folks. But I would encourage you to take a look at the census information we have on our website. What was that, Charity?
For some reason, it's stuck. I'm going to try and pass the ball to you and see if maybe you can move them forward.
Okay. Sorry, everyone. I'm on the road today, so it's not quite working out as easily as it often we try to make it happen. Okay. So let's see if this works. Does that work, Charity?
Yes, that's working. Yay!
Okay.
All right.
All right. So where does community action go next? The partnership and the network last year, I guess 2 years ago now, I'm losing track of time, approved a new vision statement for the Community Action Partnership. The vision of the Community Action Partnership is a nation that creates opportunities for all people to thrive, builds healthy or strong, resilient communities, and ensures a more equitable society. We believe this is a high-impact vision statement and something that we can all be working toward. And something that I think really can help local agencies and new staff, especially to know who we are and what we're grounded in as a network, are the value statements. We believe that all people should be treated with dignity and respect and recognize that structural race, gender, and other inequities remain barriers. We believe this nation has the capacity and moral obligation. We believe that with hope, adequate resources, and opportunities, everyone can reach their full potential. And we pledge ourselves as a network to create an environment that pursues innovation and excellence through partnering with others. We recognize that we're not in this alone. This is a quote from Brian Stevenson. Just Mercy is his most well-known book, and is actually a movie that's going to be coming out here shortly. I hope you all get a chance to go see it. He frames poverty is not the opposite of poverty is not wealth. The opposite of poverty is justice. And again, a quote that I think firmly defines community action is clearly that. Building on that, this is a statement that has come out of the Community Action Partnership as well, that we really want to change the narrative on poverty, to speak the true narrative on poverty, and that these are some of the, again, declarative statements that we're trying to frame our work around at the partnership, and we hope the network does as well. That if all families and communities are going to thrive, racialized attitudes and systems policies must be named and dismantled. That in order for America to solve the issue of poverty, we must stop hating the poor. Narratives which promote human value and belonging for all must be front and center. And that the partnership will engage in strategic communications effort which humanizes people living in poverty, exposes the structural forces that shape poverty, and convenes allies to shape that narrative. So when you see our impact report, it's faces of hope. We believe that all families deserve the best, and that we want to promote human value and to dispel those myths and dispel those stereotypes. So just a few other things I want to touch base. I know we're coming up here at the top of the hour. This is something that's new. If you're looking for the newest thing on child poverty, is the report from the American Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. They have an executive summary to this 600-page document that you may want to take a look at. I'm going to skip past that. I'm going to pause here, though, and let you know, especially since this is kind of a grounding webinar, that May is Community Action Month. Your CAP agency might have special events. You might have a reception. You might be engaging staff in an all-staff day. You might be pushing out a lot of great information about community action. I hope you get involved in May and Community Action Month. You can use your own personal Twitter, Facebook, whatever you got going on. We got tweets, we got a toolkit, we got Facebook posts, we got memes, we got all sorts of good stuff. And every May we do have a calendar of events that help community action agencies kind of rally. We talk about Throwback Thursdays. You'll see a lot of pictures from back in the old days of community action. You'll have Training Tuesday where there might be a special webinar going on about a particular topic. You'll have National Nurses Day where we thank all of the nurses who are working in community action, and there are a lot of them. But just kind of gives you a flavor for what Community Action Month would look like. We use a lot of different memes during Community Action Month. You'll see here we have Huggy Hearts available in all sorts of different colors. We have the great Rainbow Huggy Heart done by San Luis Obispo, California, that's used quite a bit during Pride Month. We like to use it all year round. We have our branding toolkit and style guide. If you want more information about how you can help brand your local agency, this is available up on our website. And you'll see here a number of CAP agencies around the country use the branding in a variety of different ways. Not every organization, certainly, but a lot of organizations are using the Huggy Heart, or they're using the colors, or they're using pieces of the branding. So this slide, it has to be one of my favorite slides in all of our slide decks, just because it shows how our network really is kind of created and looks like a family. If you want more information, we do have a podcast that was recorded that is up on our website as well. We have sessions on advocacy, racial equity, the state of CSBG, all sorts of different things. Dr. Gail Christopher is our guest on our racial equity podcast. It's probably one of the best ones out there on our podcast list. It's available also up on our website or in your app store as well. We do have an online learning academy through Moodle, Community Action Academy. We encourage you to maybe log in, take a look. You can download the app and get community action training wherever you are, always at your fingertips. We have a lot of on-demand learning. You can listen to a webinar anywhere you are if you have your cell phone with you. You'll see here we have a variety of different topics. And again, since I know this is kind of a grounding webinar, I believe that all of you can have a career in community action. I hope you do. I've been very lucky and blessed in my life. I started out as a CAP agency, at a CAP agency back in 1994, 25 years ago, as a social worker in a group home program for adolescents. I've worked at the state association level and now working at the national level. Not everyone will necessarily have that path, but whatever path works for you, I hope that you embrace it and that you find a way to stay in community action. We know that the millennials are now going to be one of the largest generation in the workforce. And in community action, we need to be responsive to younger folks coming in. I know back when I was here 25 years ago, starting out on my first CAP agency job, I'm like, I actually get to work for the quintessential anti-poverty organization. How cool is that? Back in 1994, there wasn't a lot of the connections. We were pretty siloed as an organization. But today's folks who are in their mid to late 20s need something different in terms of training and connectivity and how we share information. There are different expectations. We're moving at a different pace. In community action, we want to be responsive to that. So you'll see here there are a number of things that I'm going to share with you, a few books that you can hopefully increase your learning if you so choose. The book on the left, the Community Action Leaders book, this was actually done by the University of Illinois, Dr. Delitzo Solomoyo, who is on our board. He actually runs a public CAP in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. University of Illinois put together this text. It's a little expensive because it is an academic text, but it's grounded in community action leadership. The book on the right, I believe you can now get online because it's a pretty old text, but Maximum Feasible Success, it really gets into the history of community action. These are the books that I tend to use this slide a lot in terms of additional reading for poverty today, whether that's $2 a Day by Catherine Neaton and Luke Schaefer, or Evicted by Matthew Desmond, Heartland by Sarah Schmarsh, Toxic Inequality by Tom Shapiro, If You're a Policy Wonk, The Forgotten Americans by Isabel Sawhill. If you read these, you'll have really strong foundation in poverty today. I see a question has come in. Will this webinar be made available to share with your staff? Yes, it will. We'll be posting this version up on the website. We have a version posted up there right now that I did 6 months ago, but we continually refresh, and I may have screwed up less on the last one. I don't remember. So we'll probably have them both posted for a while, but that will be up, and we'll make sure to share this with the folks who registered for today's webinar as well. So if you're looking for a career in community action, I encourage you to think about what I call the trifecta of leadership development. I've been able to do all three of these pieces, and I will say without the CCAP, I don't know if I'd be sitting in this chair here today. The CCAP really changed the trajectory of my professional career in community action. I did it back in 07, 08, something like that. It really grounds you in the history of community action. You need to demonstrate that you understand leadership and management principles. You need to sit for an exam, yes, but a CCAP was an amazing experience. Becoming a certified Roma trainer, or today we can also do Roma implementer. I'm one of those too. I know that it's a lot of hoops to go through, but talk about getting grounded in outputs versus outcomes, understanding the Roma cycle, understanding how Roma is not just about the data, that Roma is about business practices. Becoming a certified Roma trainer is a great foundational element. And PAG's peer reviewer, you can learn more about that up on our website. But again, that is an important organizational development credential that you can earn in our network as well. You still want more? We have Elite up on our website. It is an online curriculum that local agencies can use for emerging leaders. To have a cohort of emerging leaders in your organization can go through the Elite curriculum. We have state associations who do state associational emerging leader cohorts using the Elite curriculum. There are webinars, there are homework assignments, there are tests, pre-test, post-tests, there are assignments, all sorts of good stuff if you want to take a look at that. And if that's not enough, here are some of the conferences and trainings. This is a little older of a slide. My apologies. CAPLA does rotate every year. In this past June, it was in Charlotte. Their conference in 2020 will be in Chicago. NCAF will be in March. The partnership, we were just in Chicago, will be in Seattle this coming August. And just in a few weeks, we'll be in Puerto Rico, for a Winter Management Leadership Training Conference. And then the NASCAS conference for the states, and I encourage you, if you ever have the chance, get to a NASCAS conference, is in Washington, usually in February or March. I think it's in March this year. And their fall one rotates. I'm not sure if I remember where this coming fall one will be for NASCAS. All right, this is our website, communityactionpartnership.com. We're not a .org because the powers that be want like $5,000 for .org. At some point, we probably just need to buy it, but right now we are a .com. We have tools and resources and webinars, all sorts of stuff up on our website. And again, you can get them on your smartphone through our Moodle app. I encourage you to save the date. If you're coming down to San Juan, we'd love to have you. We know that can be quite the trip, though, and you may not be able to join us. So I hope that we would see you in Seattle in August. Last year we had 1,500 people in Chicago. That was a very large conference. Usually it's 1,300 or so. We'd love to have you. It's an amazing experience, and I hope that we will see you not so sleepless in Seattle. We have a number of folks you can reach out to. You can reach out to me. I see there might be some trouble hearing me. Sorry about that. But you can certainly email me. We'll send out the slide deck and the recording in the next couple of days. You can reach out to myself and Tiffany, Hyacinth. She also goes by Zandy, Courtney. We have a variety of new folks coming on board too. They're all up available on our website. You can see our social media handles. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, all that good stuff. I'm going to circle back here to the question box here just for a moment to make sure I hit everything. I will investigate the areas of civil rights, war on poverty, systematic racism, and inequality. It is a rich history, present and future. Yes, definitely. Thank you. And I think that might be, are those all the questions? I think it might be. And we will definitely send you some more poverty resources. Great. Charity, is anything coming on your side?
Nope. All the questions you answered.
All right. Well, folks, thank you so much again for being part of today's webinar. I know we threw a lot of information at you. This will be recorded. If I got anything wrong, that's on me and my brain not trying to get all my details right, especially on some of that history. So my apologies if I got anything specifically wrong on that. But try to give you the flavor of the history. Hopefully you got a sense of the passion we bring to this work. It's amazing to be part of community action. I hope that you find your way through a career path in community action. It's been amazing for me. What you do every day to help families is so inspirational. So thank you, everyone, for all that you do. And we'll see you soon. Thanks a lot. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.